Hello. Welcome to CrossCurrents, produced by the City of Fort Collins in cooperation with the Larimer County League of Women Voters. I'm Barbara Rutstein, the moderator for today's program. Our topic is marijuana, prohibition to regulation. This election day in Fort Collins, we will have two ballot issues dealing with marijuana. One seeks to overturn Fort Collins voters' decision last November to outlaw medical marijuana dispensaries within the city limits. The other is a statewide ballot issue that would amend the Colorado Constitution to allow the personal use and regulation of marijuana in this state. Today, we are going to discuss the statewide issue known as Amendment 64, and I refer you to our previous program in September of 2011 for a discussion of the local issue. Before we turn to our panel, I'd like to give a very brief description of some of the points of Amendment 64. It provides for the regulation of marijuana and permits people 21 years of age or older to consume or possess 1 ounce or less of marijuana. There are provisions dealing with possessing, growing, and transporting plants, the operation and licensing of marijuana-related facilities, and it allows local governments to regulate or prohibit such facilities in their jurisdiction. If the amendment passes, the State General Assembly will impose fees and excise taxes on the businesses involved. The first $40 million of the excise tax money will go to school construction. It also has provisions that prohibit driving under the influence of marijuana and allows private property owners to prohibit the use, the possession, or growing of marijuana on their private property. In general, the idea is to regulate marijuana the way alcohol is regulated. On our panel, we have various points of view, and our participants will discuss what they think are the most important issues to consider when deciding how to vote. On my right is Brian Vicente, co-director, Campaign to Regulate Marijuana. On his right is Larry Abrahamson, Larimer County District Attorney. On his right is Birnbaum, medical doctor and a family practice doctor in Fort Collins. On his right is former mayor and spokesperson for the ballot issue 301, which is the local ballot issue. So welcome to you and to our studio audience, and thank you for being willing to be part of this discussion. Rather than go through many more of the provisions of this amendment, what else would you like to bring out that you think that I've missed?
Well, I would just say, I think you did an excellent job laying out the basics of the amendment. I'm one of the principal authors. Really what we're trying to do is regulate marijuana like alcohol. This is a framework that Coloradans and people around this country are used to. We're limiting possession to adults 21 and over, just like alcohol. And we firmly believe that moving marijuana sales off of the streets, out of public parks, and away from cartels, frankly, and moving them behind the counter where people are asking for ID, where that is done in a regulated fashion, makes more sense. And it's also going to produce a lot of tax revenue for the state. I know we're going to get into that. I would just point out a couple of the finer points from the amendment. I did want to stress that this does not allow public use of marijuana in any way. It only allows adults 21 and over to possess small amounts of marijuana privately. It also.
And what does that mean? In their own home?
Correct, in their own home, or in their own home, essentially,
okay.
In their pocket, I suppose. But they can't, smoke at the park or at Mishawaka or wherever. That would be illegal. And another amendment or another provision here that I think is pretty important, especially for farmers out in this area, is this amendment also allows for farmers to grow hemp. And hemp is just a different plant than marijuana. It has no psychoactive powers, but ultimately it's been made illegal in the same way that marijuana was. So if we were able to allow our state farmers to grow this. It could be a really valuable cash crop. It's really used for fiber for construction materials and so forth. So really just allow farmers another option of things to grow. And the final piece I would point out, just while we're talking about the particularities, is we wrote into this language that employers will not have to change their workplace policies in any way. So upon the passage of this amendment, they can absolutely fire people for using marijuana inside or outside of their work. It's pretty clear in the language, and we just wanted to make sure that employers in our state had the powers to continue to have the appropriate workplace safety policies.
Okay, anybody else want to add anything about the provisions? Ray?
I think there's one point in here that points out, and I'm looking at the Blue Book, is that they can possess up to 6 marijuana plants. So it's not just carrying an ounce of marijuana, it's being able to grow 6 marijuana plants as well as carrying
In one's
an ounce.
home?
In one's home, absolutely.
Yes.
That's a lot of marijuana.
Okay.
I would just say that is what medical marijuana patients are currently allowed to grow. They've been allowed to grow for 12 years, up to 6 plants. So adults 21 and over could grow that number of plants in their home. Is what we consider personal possession in this state. If they were to sell that would be 100% illegal. This is only, similar to how an adult can brew beer right now. Again, we're regulating marijuana like alcohol. We want to have the rights of adults 21 and over in the privacy of their own home to grow a small amount of marijuana plants. Our prediction is that very few people will actually do this, and I would just ask you, do you brew beer? Most people don't. They choose to go to a store where it's regulated and labeled and taxed, and they know what they're purchasing.
Well,
okay,
in
right.
fact, they do have brew stores where people do brew their own beer, and there's a lot of brewing going on. It's become a lot more popular. But in fact, too, is that it's out of control. People that do grow their marijuana plants, the sheriff's offices report themselves that they've had 60-some cases of complaints of illegal growing operations that they haven't been able to even address. So I think the growing operation of what we call personal use, is very prolific, and it's to the point that enforcement can't even be able to enforce it. When you're talking about 3 or 6 marijuana plants for personal use, do the math on that. And the other thing that's interesting, it says you can have 6 marijuana plants. It doesn't say if it's a 10-foot plant or a 13-inch plant. But let's say if it's a 13-inch plant, which incidentally, some of the people who were producing marijuana in Fort Collins for the medicinal purposes were growing 10-foot marijuana plants. Now that, over 1 year, a 10-foot plant is probably going to grow a dozen pounds of marijuana. But a 13-inch plant, and this is reports I've read from DEA, a 13-inch plant is certainly capable of producing up to 2 pounds of marijuana a year. So if you have 6 of those, think about what that points. I just was doing the math on that. If you did 3 mature plants, in 1 year would produce 6 pounds of marijuana. That's about 60 cigarettes per ounce, which comes out to, for a pound, about 960 marijuana cigarettes. Well, for the entire 6 pounds, it comes out to about 5,760 marijuana cigarettes, which is 15 marijuana cigarettes a day, almost 16 marijuana cigarettes a day.
Well,
now, for
wait a minute. Now,
personal
let's
use,
get back to the idea of alcohol. So the idea is, you're saying, I think, that a person could grow much more than they can use, right?
Absolutely. And
okay.
then when you compare
and
that,
then the other question is, can they sell it?
No, absolutely not. That would remain 100% illegal. And I think, really the argument here is if we stop focusing on arresting adults 21 and over for possessing marijuana and in some cases cultivating small amounts, the police are going to have a lot more time to focus on real crime. And that's what we need. So Colorado arrests 10,000 adults every year. Our country arrests 860,000 of our fellow Americans every year for this war on marijuana. And how could those law enforcement resources be used better? And there's real crimes in Fort Collins. There's real crimes across the state. That's where police should be focusing their resources, not on adults possessing a substance that ultimately is safer than alcohol for the user.
well,
Well,
under
wait a
Colorado
minute, though.
law,
Are they being arrested for 1 ounce or less?
They-
About Larry? What do you say?
Well, they aren't. Right now in Colorado, if you possess under an ounce of marijuana, you're getting a citation. You're not even permitted to be arrested. You're given the maximum of $100 fine. So there's not a lot of law enforcement resources that are taken to deal with the amount of marijuana that we're talking about here.
Do those people have to go to court when they're cited?
Well, sure they do, but you were talking about arrests.
Does that take resources from your office that could be used on tougher crimes? Instead, you're dealing with prosecuting adults for possessing small amounts of marijuana?
Can we get some
think-
order to this
yeah.
Q&A?
Yeah,
let
I'm
me-
just trying, but let's
yeah,
just
let
have
me-
the discussion, and
Yeah, right.
I just don't want one person to monopolize all the time.
But
So
I'd
I'm
like
trying
Larry
to bring
be able
other
to
people in.
finish, though. I'd like you to be able to
Well,
finish.
Yeah, I think, when you're looking at the amount of resources taken for possession of marijuana, it's not a huge impact on law enforcement. I mean, I've also heard arguments that, this will free up beds in the Department of Corrections because people are spending time there on marijuana possession charges, which is just flat not true. The people who are there that perhaps are serving a sentence and the charge is possession of marijuana, you have to go back and say, well, how many violations have there been? How many other crimes are associated with it? And we've challenged people who've made that statement to find one person in the Department of Corrections who doesn't legitimately belong there when you look at the record and look what everything's gone on. Now, if we look at law enforcement and how much resource is taken for marijuana cases that are under 1 ounce, generally speaking, a citation is written on the street. Somebody is found with a joint, they write them a citation and say, here's your date to go in court. They appear in court. Sometimes they just enter a plea of guilty. It takes no effort or time from our office. And there's not a huge number, so there's not an influx of people coming in that are tying up the courts because of possession of marijuana cases. It's just not a huge draw on law enforcement. Now, if you're talking about large amounts where there are people who are selling it, they're trafficking it, yes, there's time and effort spent in investigating those cases. And I'm assuming that would continue to happen under Amendment 64. So when you're talking about saving resources in the law enforcement arena, it's just not going to be that big an impact when you're talking about this. What you are doing is you're making marijuana more prolific in the community, and you're telling our young people that it's just not that big a deal. And that's what
Okay,
concerns us.
Bernie, want to weigh in?
So I'm just going to go back to the original question.
Yes,
which
that's
is
fine.
why is Amendment 64, what are the provisions of Amendment 64 that are important? And I think the comment that hasn't been made is that by criminalizing marijuana, you make people who use marijuana criminals. And whether or not it's just issuing a citation or not, there is tremendous ramification. And believe me, I see this in my practice on a daily basis. I see people who come in who've been issued citations who can't get federal student loans. Now, that may not change right away. That's not going to change right away. And we can talk about the national issues involved and whether or not we should be doing this on a statewide or a national basis. But the reality of it is that we create the concept of criminalization. And I think that's the intellectual side of this argument that's very important to have. I don't want to see recreational users be called criminals. I want them to be seen as recreational users. Now, the question of amount, Ray, I think is a very interesting one, because you're absolutely right. 6 marijuana plants is a ton of pot, okay? And there are people who are growing large quantities of marijuana. And the question that I would ask both of you is, why do they do that today? And I'll answer my own question. They do that today because they can sell it. And when they sell it, it's very, very cost effective for them to do so. And those are the criminals that you do have to work on. Right? And I would argue that that's problematic no matter how you go about it. I mean, when someone shows up with a truckload of weed in their car, they're not a good citizen. Okay? I'm not going to suggest that that's a good thing. But we could make that go away tomorrow by legalizing marijuana. Now, that being said, granted, if Colorado's the only place to do it, it causes all kinds of issues. I'm not going to disagree with that at all, but somebody has to start. Because we've created a culture in our society that leads to the sale and production of large quantities of marijuana by criminals. By the way, those same criminals also sell the OxyContin that physicians prescribe. They also sell heroin. They also sell cocaine, right? They also sell guns in the black market. Those are issues that have to be addressed. And those are some of the positive, in my mind, unintended consequences of this amendment. So that's just a few points I'd like to make.
Okay, and I have a question because you brought it up about decriminalization. What is the difference between decriminalizing and legalizing marijuana?
Well, maybe I can touch on it a little bit. Some places have decriminalized marijuana by making it a civil process as opposed to a criminal process. and I believe in Colorado it's the same thing. When you have under an ounce of marijuana, it's not considered a criminal violation, but it is considered a violation where you are assessed a $100 fine and you go on your way. Same way in some other states, I think they've done the same thing. When you decriminalize it, you're saying that basically there's another process you can use to control it. When you legalize it, you're saying that isn't even available. It is just available for people to use as they want to use it, provided they follow the rules. And the question really, I think, that needs to be asked here is why? Why are we doing this? I mean, what is the benefit to the community? Are we going to, you're saying $40 million is going to go to education. Is our education so broke that we've got to use drug money to support it? I mean, that's the problem that I'm having with this when I look at it and say, why do we want to do this? Alcohol causes so many problems in the criminal justice system. Now we're taking another substance and saying, well, why don't we make this just like alcohol? And now you have another mind-altering substance that you're adding to the system that is going to be equal as problematic, just as problematic perhaps as alcohol. And so I asked myself, why do we as a society feel that's a good thing that we want to do, and why do we want to encourage our kids to see this as something that is acceptable? Is that the way we want to go? Is that the story we want to? Is that the legacy we want to leave our kids in this community?
Okay, Brian.
Marijuana is already out there. It's in the community. It's being sold by drug dealers, cartels, and gangs. Now, we need to accept that, and we need to move it behind the counter, defund those gang profits, and put it in front of people that are asking for identification. Your average drug dealer is not asking for ID. If you sell it like alcohol is done, if those people are given a license to do this by the state, and they will lose that license and go to jail if they sell to people under 21, that's how you can make it safer for teens. And in the meantime, we can take the profits away from these cartels. We're looking at about $60 million in new tax revenue and law enforcement savings every year, or for the first 5 years, which is currently going to gangsters. Then after 5 years, this is estimated to go up to $100 to $120 million in new tax revenue. That's revenue that we should take off of the streets. That's revenue we should bring into the tax coffers of the local government, the state government, and that's $40 million that we can use every year for public school construction and take away from gangsters.
Well,
I'm going to talk about that. You can go after me. But $40 million is nothing. I called a local person in school issues, and he said an elementary school costs $6 to $7 million, and the Fort Collins High School cost $100 million. So $40 million statewide is nothing.
But just to say
and I
quickly,
hope we're
though,
not that desperate.
That can be bonded to be $250 million per year, though. With a steady stream of income of $40 million of new tax revenue, that can be bonded to $250 million every single year. It can go to help build new schools, but also go to upgrade schools. There's a lot of schools that don't have the computer services, the environmental services they need, and this is a way for us to fix those schools up.
Okay, Ray.
And he's bringing out a good point. This is exactly what the drug cartel like to do. They like to buy you off. And they would like to feed you the fact that we'll give you money if you legalize our drugs. Now, that's a poor way of setting an example of how to deal with this issue and how to pay for schools, putting drug money out there for people, trying to entice them to vote this way by saying, we'll give you money. When you can't even do it under Tabor, it has to be voted by the taxpayers. That's for one thing. Guns are legalized, and guns are allowed to be sold, and there's regulations on them, and they're still sold on the black market. So to lead people to think by having storefronts, all of a sudden you're doing away with the black market. In fact, what you've done is you created a new black market, and that's already been proven by the Attorney General for Colorado, who is indicting people who had storefronts, selling it out the back door, shipping pounds of marijuana to different states, 23 different states.
What about alcohol? Is there a black market for alcohol? Are people bootlegging alcohol still?
Are you going to let me finish?
Please do. Can you answer that?
Well, I'm going to answer this question first. My point is that if you're going to allow people to do this through drug cartels, the drug cartels are going to increase their profits because they can use storefronts. In fact, we just had, it was Kelly Olson's home. His neighbors, they had a shootout, and the police had to respond. And by the admission of that person in that home said the reason why we moved to Colorado is so we could legitimately open up a storefront and ship marijuana back to Nebraska. That was their whole purpose, and they admitted that, and that was in the paper. So you can see what it starts to propagate. It starts bringing in more people out of state who want to use it as a front so they can smuggle drugs out. So it's not doing away with the black market, it's created a new one, is what it's done.
Okay.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
I'm not sure that you're wrong about that with the medical marijuana thing, but you got to start somewhere, and you have to ask the question, and I'll address your question as well. I don't want my kids to look at marijuana and say this is something that I should use. But I want to have the opportunity to know that if they make mistakes, they're not screwed, for lack of a better word. I want to look at our population and think about the harms that various things cause. Now, if we want to really have the argument about prohibition of marijuana, we have to have the argument about prohibition of alcohol. And I will tell you, in Fort Collins, we pray to the God of alcohol. It is a huge driver of our economy. It is a huge part of what we do here. And the reality of it is that I have never admitted someone to the hospital for marijuana use. Ever. And I've been doing this a reasonably long time. Okay? The reality of the situation is that marijuana is a drug of abuse. Marijuana has an abuse syndrome associated with it. It has dependency. It has addiction, without any doubt. But it doesn't kill people. Alcohol kills people every single day in Fort Collins. Every day. And so the question I think that we have to ask is, how are we going to be consistent in our public policy? And then how are we going to use that public policy to help people make decisions that are useful and that are safe? I want our children to be educated to make safe and useful decisions. And I worry a lot more about my kids binge drinking from alcohol than I do about really just about any other substance. And so I just want to put it out there that has to be addressed. Now, to address yours just a little bit more, the reality of it is that if we create criminals, or we create a class of criminals through, and this is the differentiation between decriminalization and legalization, we create people who have a hard time getting jobs. We create people who can't then choose to stop and advance. Now, when children are arrested and they're charged with a misdemeanor and it gets wiped when they're 18, that's one thing. But what about the 22-year-old who then has to disclose on his application to medical school after he stopped using marijuana that I had a misdemeanor for marijuana use? Or what about that guy that decides that he wants to open a small business, and he applies for insurance? And there are many different examples there, and I think that we need to take those into account, because what we've created right now is a very effective way of getting folks out of the system. And then you have to ask, well, who does that actually affect? And chances are, it probably won't affect my kids. A, because they probably will choose not to use marijuana. B, because I have good legal counsel, should they, And C, because I fall into the racial, socioeconomic class that allows me protection from the law. And the reality of the situation is if you look nationally and in the state of Colorado, minorities are disproportionately targeted may not be the right word, are disproportionately affected by these laws. And we need to figure out, if we're going to have a just and open society, how do we include everyone? And I would actually argue that legalization instead of decriminalization moves you in that direction a little bit more.
Okay, any other comments on that?
Well, I would just say on the it's been widely documented the war on drugs is racist in its implementation, and what we've seen in Colorado is that African Americans make up 4% of our state's population, and 8% of the arrests, and 25% of the arrests for 8% of the arrests for possession of marijuana, 25% of the arrests for cultivation. So it's just, it's impacting people in a real way, as the doctor laid out. And I just don't think it's fair to burden adults who are 21 or over with this criminal record that makes it tougher to get a job, especially when the laws are being enforced in a disproportionate fashion.
Do we know anything about the facts of dispensaries? Have they really violated the law by selling a whole lot more out of the back door? I'm sure some have.
There's indictments.
Is it 1%, 10%, 90%? I don't know. Do you know, Larry?
There's several stories.
I don't know the percentage, but I do know from comments I've heard from law enforcement officials, not only local officials, but the federal officials, that it is not uncommon. And that, I can't say what uncommon is, 25% or 75%. But they're saying it's a significant problem when dispensaries were opening up, that the way they were making the big money was to sell it out the back door. And that was a significant problem. And this is also a concern for this particular law. It might look like we're trying to do something that makes sense by legalizing and controlling something that marijuana is not that big a deal. Nobody's dying from marijuana, so why should you get excited about it? But when you really look at what is happening, we have, in our system, we have drug courts. We have juvenile drug courts and adult drug courts. In our juvenile drug court, the most pervasive drug that we deal with is marijuana. Probably 80% of the kids. And these aren't kids that would just get a charge of marijuana. It's where marijuana has significantly affected their life with their family, with their school, with a job if they have one, with their associations, with their friendships, to the point where they're spinning out of control. 75 to 80% of those kids in drug court are marijuana users. Now, you can't say that that's really not a problem in our society. So I think you have to really take kind of a step back and say, yeah, we can control this probably to some level, but what are we giving up in the process if we try and do that? We're going to be the first state. We got to start somewhere, so let's be the state that's going to open our doors to marijuana usage and legalize it so other people can come in from other states and buy it, and that the drug cartel can sell a whole lot more up here. Because I think, like the doctor was saying, is that we have to start somewhere, which means that the rest of the country is not yet behind this. And until the rest of the country is doing the same thing, the cartels are going to make big bucks off us. And that's going to be a real problem.
So you see it getting worse?
I see it getting worse, absolutely.
Even though people, when they apply for alcohol licenses, I know go through some kind of process that have to show that they're upstanding citizens, et cetera, and the license can be taken away.
Certainly, and I think that was built into this too, to try and show that, well, hey, we can control alcohol this way, so we can control marijuana. One thing, I think it's a fallacy to try and compare alcohol to marijuana. I think it's apples and oranges. When people smoke a joint, it's not in a social atmosphere to saying, hey, let's stand around or sit around at a party and smoke a joint like we do with a glass of wine. There's a lot of alcohol usage that is not meant to get people drunk. They don't drink to get drunk. Very few people smoke a joint of marijuana with any thought of doing anything except getting high. I mean, that's the whole purpose of using marijuana, is to get high.
There's 100,000 medical marijuana patients in this state that I think would disagree with you. They're using it for pain and suffering and nausea.
Well, I'm sure.
I'm not talking about that. We're not addressing medical marijuana in Amendment 64. We're saying open the doors for everybody over 21. That's the concern.
Could I quickly speak to the medical marijuana dispensary piece? We've gone through a very interesting phase in the last several years with medical marijuana. And what we found is that ultimately the most hardened drug war zealots took a look at the medical marijuana system, and they released a report about a month ago. And they found that in 12 years, they could point to about 60 cases of allegations of marijuana being sent out of the state. Right, and to me, and we have 100,000 medical marijuana patients in the state. We have about 500 or 600 medical marijuana stores that are state licensed at the state and local level. The fact that you can point to 60 examples in 12 years, I think, shows that the system is in fact working. And I did want to say on the teen use piece, it sounds to me like from the district attorney, like our current system isn't working. Marijuana use among teens is a major problem, and everyone at this table can agree with that. And this is something, and if we have a major problem, and high school kids have said for years, decades, that marijuana is universally available. If it is universally available, we need to do something different. We owe it to them to do something different. And what this amendment would do is take those sales, marijuana sales, off of the street corners, away from where people can get access to them, move them behind the counter where people are asking for ID. And what we found with medical marijuana is since Colorado started regulating medical marijuana in 2009, the Centers for Disease Control took a look from 2009 to 2011 at what had happened, and teen marijuana use went down 11% in our state during that time, where we had regulated medical marijuana sales. Teen marijuana use went up 11% nationally. So we've seen that regulating this product, getting it off the streets, can actually help keep it away from teens.
Okay, and I have a question about alcohol, too. What number of students or youngsters do you have coming through the courts with alcohol abuse?
I don't have a percentage on that, but we don't have as many, from my experience, that have alcohol abuse issues that are committing also delinquent acts. We see more right now, because of our drug court perhaps, of people who are coming in, or kids who are coming in, who have significant problems with marijuana. There, obviously, when you have parties, you have people under 21, you have the 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Yes, there's a frat party on campus. There's going to be a lot of drinking. So certainly they're going to get alcohol citations, MIPs. There's a lot of those that go through court. And so, but again, I don't know if you can make a comparison of alcohol and marijuana. But if you do want to make a comparison, you really, again, I come back to the same question. Why do we want to add another substance that's a problematic substance to our community and to our kids? Isn't alcohol enough of a problem? I mean, why do we want to now look at marijuana and say, well, it's not as bad as alcohol, so let's add this to our list of problems? That
Okay.
just doesn't make any sense.
Bernie?
Can I make some comments, and I'll try to throw some data in here because I like.
Okay.
I'm an academic. I like numbers. In the United States, and according to the CDC, somewhere between 45 and 47% of adults have used marijuana at least once in their life. Somewhere about 25% potentially within the last year, and about 10% within the last month. The vast majority of people who use marijuana use it intermittently in the setting of a party, like people who use alcohol. And that's really, really an important point. There are plenty of stoners, for lack of a better term, out there who have a problem with marijuana. There definitely are. But the vast majority of people don't, actually. And the reality of the situation is we have to ask, would legalization increase that usage? And if you actually looked at alcoholism during Prohibition and after Prohibition, the reality of the situation is you still had plenty of alcoholics during Prohibition, and we still have plenty of alcoholics now. And what is the same is that we don't have adequate resources or adequate attention as a society to figure out how to actually care for those people, how to actually help them from moving from having a substance abuse problem to beyond that. And I will posit to you, and I think you'd agree with this, we're completely failing right now. We are completely failing. We're doing a better job. Drug courts are a great thing. We're doing a much better job through the drug court system of allowing folks to have, but particularly adolescents, to have access to the treatment services that they need. Unfortunately, there is not an analogous system for adults, and adults who can't afford it can't seek care anyway until they get into the drug system. And then maybe or maybe not they'll get into that system, or maybe they'll get into the penal system. And so I'm just not sure that it's that cut and dry. And I can tell you for sure that the majority of marijuana users use it very similar to the way the majority of people use alcohol, which is recreationally. And one of the reasons that it is potentially abused more, I'll just posit, is because you have to do it in a hidden background place. You can't do it really that safely in your living room. You can't let other people know that you do it because you put yourself up for demonization, criminalization, if you want to put it that way. And so I think we could change our attitudes a little bit about that.
Okay,
Now,
Ray?
let me make just a couple of comments. One is, I think it's interesting that here's an ad that was ran in the New York Times in 2002, and it was a paid full ad. It's an open letter to parents, and it said, quote, it's a short one. It says, marijuana puts kids at risk. It is most widely used illicit drug among youth today and is more potent than ever. Marijuana use can lead to a host of significant health, social, learning, and behavioral problems excuse me, at a crucial time in a young person's development. And don't be fooled by the popular beliefs. Kids can get hooked on pot. Research shows that marijuana can lead to addiction. More teens enter treatment for marijuana abuse each year than for all other illicit drugs combined. Now, this ad was paid for and endorsed by 18 organizations such as...
Oh, no, we don't need to go into that.
No, I think we do. This is what's important. The American Academy of Family Physicians, because we have a doctor here, and they're disagreeing with them. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Emergency Physicians, the American Medical Association.
Okay. I don't want to hear all those,
I
because
think the people deserve to hear it.
we're not talking about, this amendment
my
talks
point,
about
it's-
21 years and older, and I know that we could go all night on
And-
the subject of
And
youngsters.
alcohol
but
is supposed to
let's-
be 21 years over and older too, but we still have problems with that in the high schools, and we
I
can't
know
control
we
that.
have problems, but that's not what this program is about.
Well, can,
Well,
can I please
that's a
address it?
21
It's
Yes,
this
yes,
is a
but I don't
really-
want to hear a whole
This
list.
is a really important point. I am an adolescent health physician. I mean, I take care of a tremendous number of teens, and that is my academic interest. I agree with you 100%. Marijuana is not good for teens. Period. Marijuana can cause, in some children who are at risk for psychosis, psychotic breaks. It can exacerbate, hear the term, exacerbate behavioral problems. It can cause lots of issues. And we are failing to deal with it in the way that we're dealing with it now. And the thing that you're positing, which I think is worth discussing, is would legalization increase use among children?
Yes.
And I'm not convinced that it would. I am fairly convinced that it would give us the opportunity to have a sane conversation, as opposed to the conversation we have right now, which is just say no. Just say no just doesn't work. Let's take methamphetamine, okay, which we would all agree should be illegal, okay, and we would all agree is very dangerous. When you advertise against methamphetamine and you put the picture of, say, a woman who looks beautiful and 5 years later has no teeth, you are showing truth. That happens to people. Absolutely. And when you ask children what they see is, no, that wouldn't happen to me. And that's been documented over and over and over again. Let's look at smoking. Do you know what the most successful intervention in the United States was to stop people from smoking? Taxes. The taxes on cigarette was the most effective thing to keep people to not smoke, right? And so the reality of the situation is, well, I mean, it's been very clearly documented in the modern public health literature that one of the major decreases in smoking in the last X number of years has been a large excise tax on tobacco. And right now, a pack of cigarettes costs something like $5. And most people with a reasonable income, given that the average income in the United States is somewhere $50,000, $60,000, cannot afford to smoke. Now, they do because it's very addictive.
Okay, I think we have a question in the audience. Why don't you identify yourself, and you may ask an individual, but then everyone can answer.
Hi, I'm Wes Melander. When I was in high school in 1970, marijuana was easy to get. And 30 years later, when my children were in high school, marijuana was still easy to get. And I imagine today, marijuana is easy for a high school student to get. I'm wondering why we believe that teen marijuana use is somehow constrained by supply rather than constrained by their own self-discipline and desire to not do it. The Managing the Future study has measured this every year since 1975, and high school seniors have said that marijuana is very easy to get. Between 80 and 90% of seniors have answered that question, as marijuana is easy to get. For every year since 1975, we have failed miserably to restrict the supply of marijuana to teenagers. Their use goes up and down. Why do we think making marijuana legal for adults will somehow make it easier than infinitely easy?
Okay. Who has an answer?
There's a great, you want to go first?
Well, I think there's a couple of things I may not entirely agree with you on, and that's that marijuana is as prolific now as it ever has been, and so why not just regulate it? There are other statistics that I've looked at and seen where it says that the marijuana usage per capita has relatively been stable, and in many cases over the last, I think, 5 to 10 years, it has actually decreased in teens, whereas the alcohol use may not follow the same line. So I don't know if that's entirely true. However, I do know that, and this was, I believe, was stated earlier, that it is still a significant problem among teens, and it's a problem that we need to be aware of. But I'm not so sure, when I talked to the superintendent of schools here a while back, when medical marijuana was a big issue and dispensaries were in town, I asked him, I said, what effect has this had on your kids in school? And he had told me, he said, basically since the dispensaries were open in town, the use of marijuana by kids in the high school area tripled. And they said, why is this? And then it said, you find out where this marijuana is coming from. Most of them were saying that they were getting it from their friends and family who had a medical marijuana card. Now, this tells me something when we're looking at Amendment 64. If we make marijuana more prolific, does that mean that more teens are going to have access to it? Well, if we look at what happened with the medical marijuana, it says most definitely. So if we're going to admit that this is a significant teen problem with marijuana, then why are we opening the floodgates? And then there's not enough money here to add new treatment facilities. And I agree. I think we need to have more education. We need to have more facilities. We need to have more treatment programs if we're going to be dealing with the marijuana at a level where our kids can understand the dangers. But this bill is not going to help that. It's going to open the floodgates, but there's no money. There's money here for constructing buildings for schools, but there's nothing that says that the money is going to be used for additional treatment programs. So what's going to happen? We're going to have now a lot of kids using drugs that they're getting from their older siblings or parents, and we have no way to stop this, and it's going to be a floodgate.
Plus, the regulation of the marijuana dispensaries now are a problem. They don't have control of them, and in fact, there for a while, I don't know if the state still has a moratorium on it, but they have stopped issuing medical marijuana cards because of the fraud that was going on. It's got out of control. They don't have a good handle on it now. When you open the new gate, saying that you can open stores now and sell it anywhere, you don't even have to get a doctor's note, you don't have to get a license or a permit from the state. Now it's just open to anyone to walk in and get it. And there's one study that shows that 80% of the kids that were interviewed said they got their marijuana from someone at a medicinal store. It's exactly what Larry said. It's validated.
Okay, Brian?
Yeah, I would just say certainly there are anecdotal conversations that people are having about rise in marijuana use. Those should be taken seriously. But at the end of the day, the federal government looked at this issue in Colorado. The Centers for Disease Control looked at it, and they found that 11%, you've seen 11% decrease in marijuana use since we started having medical marijuana stores among teens. And also the incidences of youth being offered marijuana on campuses went down dramatically as well. So, that's what we're looking at statewide. And, when this passes, isn't this law is about adults 21 and older. That is what we're changing this for. We're regulating this like alcohol. That means the police will stop arresting 10,000 adults, and that's police time, stopping to write a ticket, frisk someone, arrest them, and then they have to go to court, deal with Mr. Abrahamson's attorneys, deal with the judge's time. When the police and prosecutors are not doing that, they're going to be able to focus more on preventing youth usage and preventing any other more serious crimes.
I want to answer your question. The answer is The Pusher. It's a great song. I think it was Steppenwolf. There's a huge market. It's very easy to sell marijuana, right? It's very easy to sell it on the street. The reason it's ubiquitously available is because it's profitable. Very, very, very profitable. We have an opportunity to undercut that profit. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned. And by the way, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about adults either. But the reality of it is it's ubiquitously available for adults as well, right? And so I agree with you 100%. I'm not happy about the fact that the funding stream for substance abuse prevention and treatment is poor. Okay? I don't think that the finances of this are the argument for why we should do it. I don't think the finances of how it will free up your staff is why we should do it. I think the reason that we should do it is because what is happening now isn't working at all. Not at all. And we should be looking for different alternatives that would allow us to have more sane policy. That's sort of how I see this, is sane policy. Final comment. If you were to ask me as a physician, what is the most dangerous substance in our society today? What would it be? It would be Coca-Cola. It would be sugar-sweetened beverages. It would be drinks and substances with high fructose corn syrup. There's a really neat study, direct linkage study actually, that showed that if you got children who were obese to stop using high fructose corn syrup containing beverages, that they lost weight and kept it off for 2 years. Right? I mean, there are other things that we need to really be paying attention to that make a difference. If you, again, ask adult Americans, lawyers, doctors, truck drivers, politicians, maybe our president, if they have ever tried marijuana, the answer is 47% of them will say yes. Are those people effective Yes. Are they less effective because they used marijuana? Not necessarily. Are some of them? Absolutely, because they had a substance abuse problem. Do we want to demonize those people? I don't think so. But are we doing that now? That's sort of how I see it now. We're demonizing them now.
Okay, I think we have a question.
My name's Tom Ketting. I'm a Fort Collins resident, and I hear both sides of this argument, and you all have done a great job presenting it. One of the things that I don't understand is this thought that the drug cartels are somehow going to make out in the long run on this. In America, we've learned that economies of scale pretty much squash the little guy. And if you can grow in large volumes and it's heavily regulated, nobody's going to be able to compete. You can't compete with an illegal operation that is not going to be able to grow as much. I mean, it's just simple American economies of scale to where something that's corporatized, legalized, taxed, regulated is going to prevail. It's been shown in every industry in America.
There is no limit to the growing operations under this law. I mean, they can grow as much as they want, and it causes the cartel, if they want to come to Colorado and start their own growing operations, and not necessarily even growing it, but bringing it in the back door and claiming it and putting it on the storefronts. And you have no way of knowing that. That's why it's called a black market, and that's why they use storefronts. Black markets using storefronts is a very common thing in all crimes. And to say it's not working is the best way to deal with it is just to legalize it. I mean, let's use this example. We have a car stolen every 30 seconds in the United States. If we don't have any control of that, we haven't won the war on stolen cars. So what do? Look at something else and say, let's legalize it or decriminalize stolen cars? I don't think so. You get a house that's broken into every 7 seconds in the United States. We haven't won that war either. We've lost that one terribly, but we're not going to stop enforcing it.
Okay, who has an answer?
Yeah, excellent question, sir. I mean, this country has experimented with prohibition before, right? We look at alcohol prohibition, which is just known as a spectacular failure. Right? What did alcohol prohibition do? It led to Al Capone and his cronies selling this illegal product at a very high margin and murdering people. And we're seeing that right now with the government's war on marijuana, with this prohibition of marijuana, where we have Mexican drug cartels and other cartels in Central and South America that are butchering themselves and butchering other people. So what did we see when we actually learned as a country and got rid of alcohol prohibition? We got rid of Al Capone. He went away. He couldn't compete with a regulated market. And now, what do we have in place of Al Capone? We have New Belgium. We have Joe Coors. We have regulated businesses that are employing Coloradans, that are paying taxes, and that are selling to people that are 21 and older.
That's just not true. There's still a black market in alcohol, believe it or not. Even though it's considered legal and have a license, there's still bootlegging that's going on. There's still alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. People are still chasing. That's why they're called alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. I mean, they're still having these problems. So that hasn't gone away. And the enforcement of alcohol alone itself is not effective. I mean, when you think about the amount of trouble we have with alcohol and what it's cost us in healthcare, we're not winning. We're collecting about $14 billion a year in alcohol taxes, and it's costing us socially about $180 billion a year. The same way with cigarettes. We're collecting about $18 billion. It's cost us over $200 billion. So it's not cost effective by just saying taxes work. It doesn't work. And the enforcement section of it, I used to be an undercover drug agent back in the 70s. And there was never a case that we didn't buy other drugs, that marijuana wasn't the wholesale product. I had people draw guns down on me, and we've had standoffs over selling 100 pounds or selling 1,000 pounds of marijuana. And that's in Colorado. So there's nothing new about that. The trafficking has increased in Colorado since the medicinal stores opened up. There's more traffic. You read about it in Grand Junction, where they intercepted a couple of tons of marijuana coming into Colorado from Mexico. Why?
So we don't think that the law would change that.
No, the law would absolutely change that. What we're doing is we are regulating this. We're putting it under the Department of Revenue, who deals with alcohol, who deals with casinos, who regulates those products fairly effectively, and that is going to be who's going to be regulating this. The idea that cartels would somehow move in and pull a fast one on the Department of Revenue, I think, is just sort of ridiculous. And I think these are the scare tactics that we've seen for 80 years of reefer madness prohibition. The government and people people like Ray have been trying to scare people and not get them to think critically about this, get them to be scared about this topic. And you need to really think to yourselves, is the war on drugs working? Is the war on marijuana working? How come teen usage rates have remained relatively constant despite the fact we're spending billions of dollars every year on this? If there was a policy that we are putting this much money into, we are affecting this many Americans' lives by criminalizing them every year, we should be getting some results, and we're not. So we need to think about a new approach that takes marijuana off the streets, puts it behind the counter, taxes it so schools and our communities can benefit.
Fighting crime, we have not won, period.
Excuse me, I didn't.
Fighting crime, we have
Yes.
not won. It doesn't matter what the offense is, whether it's marijuana or if it's an armed robbery or if it's a shooting. We have not won any of those, and that's why you have law enforcement today. That's why you have laws. On top of that, this is a federal violation for Colorado to be doing. It's a violation of federal law. And the courts have ruled, the Supreme Court has ruled, that we can't supersede what the federal law says, but yet we're trying to do it in the face of it.
Okay, and then what is the result of that? That was one of my questions we never got to. What would happen if we were to pass this?
Well, you know, and I think that's going to be litigated tremendously if this passes, because there are a lot of things that we do in the state of Colorado that are tied to matching funds from the federal government. Start with transportation to begin with. And a lot of the requirements from federal grants is that you have to be in comply with federal law. Whether it's a drug-free workplace or with federal loans or student loans, whether or not you have to comply with the drug usage laws of the federal government. All of these are built into many of the contracts that we now get from the federal government. So I think some of the unintended consequences are going to be what's going to happen to federal matching funds, what's going to happen to federal grants, what's going to happen to federal student loans once Colorado becomes a state that legalizes marijuana. And I think there's going to be a significant impact. And when the federal government says no, it's going to be litigated to find out whether states have their authority to do that or not. That's going to be a tremendous cost to the state. So those are some unintended consequences, and we can conjecture about, no, that's not going to happen, it hasn't before, and it's not going to be a big deal, and the federal government will come around and not enforce the law. I don't think that's going to get us there. Plus the fact, another unintended consequence is all the rules and regulations have to be prepared, they have to be regulated, they have to be enforced. Who's paying for that? There's an additional cost to the states, apart from the federal government. There's nothing built into this law that's going to help pay for the extra cost of doing this. So there's a lot of things that I think we have to look at, not only from the federal government standpoint, but also the additional costs to the state that are not being addressed.
Okay, and my last question was, or is, what are the unintended consequences? You addressed it. We'll let Brian do it, and then we'll go to Bernie and then to Ray, and then we'll end the program.
So I would just say this is a self-funding program. It's written into there. The people that apply for these stores, which Fort Collins can ban and say they don't want the stores, will be paying for the government to regulate them. So that's sort of a non-argument. And also, we have 17 states with medical marijuana laws, including Colorado. Colorado's never lost a federal grant because of this. We've never lost federal funding. No other state has either because of their medical marijuana laws. And those are in violation or run parallel to federal laws. So I think we need to think hard about that. But in terms of unintended consequences, I would mention a topic we haven't really touched upon, which is hemp. Again, this does allow Colorado farmers to grow hemp. That will be regulated by the Department of Revenue. And this is a massive product. We import millions, tons and tons of hemp every year from Canada and China. And if Colorado farmers could grow this crop and become the sole domestic producer for it, it could just be a major boon to our state's farmers.
Okay, Bernie?
I think one of the maybe intended consequences would be that we'd be able to focus on health instead of criminal behavior. And by being able to focus on health in terms of criminal behavior, we can begin to actually talk about what's sane and what's not sane. There is sane alcohol use. There absolutely is. I think most people would agree on that. There is sane use of sugar-sweetened beverages. I don't know that there's sane tobacco use, but we've decided that that's legal. And I certainly don't know that there's sane use of handguns, but we've decided that that's legal and sane. So I would posit that it begins to allow us as a society to change our argument from a just say no culture to a culture of health. Let's talk about health. Let's talk about human behavior as it really is. Let's talk about sex and sexuality. Let's talk about heavy alcohol use versus safe social alcohol use. Because the reality of it is we've created a culture right now that says, this thing is really bad, it's really dangerous, it's the boogeyman. And people then hide it and act like it's the boogeyman. And I believe that we have an opportunity to change things. Is Amendment 64 the right way? Well, I'll scratch my beard on that one a little bit. I am concerned about some of the same unintended consequences that you are. I'm concerned about issues related to interstate commerce. And I think that those need to be worked out, but I do believe that it's the right thing to do and somebody needs to start.
Okay, Ray, unintended
Well,
consequences.
I think the unintended consequences, the impact that it's going to have on our youth and our adults, young adults for tomorrow. How we take care of them today is going to depend on how they take care of us tomorrow. And to have them misbelieve that it's okay and that it's medicinal and it's safer, I think is really bad information. It's bad education for our youth. It sends the wrong message, and I think you're going to increase the amount of health problems over the long run. When we talked about cigarettes 60 years ago, you had physicians from tobacco companies saying it's okay to smoke a few cigarettes. Now we find out it's our #1 killer. What is that going to say about marijuana down the road? They're already saying that a joint of marijuana in some studies is equivalent to a pack of cigarettes. So if you're smoking 15 joints a day, which you're allowed up to, can you imagine what that is? And the amount of health damage that does to you? And who gets to pay for that cost? We all do. That's going to cause health care to go up as well. So there are some unintended consequences, there's no question about it.
Okay, thank you for our wonderful, stimulating discussion. Thank you to our studio and viewing audiences. This CrossCurrents program will be rebroadcast at various times during the month on Channel 14 in Fort Collins. Please consult your local listings for the exact dates and times. Copies of recent CrossCurrents programs are available for checkout at the Poudre River Library at 201 Peterson Street and at Front Range Community College at Shield Street and Harmony Road. The video is available at the League of Women Voters website, which is www.lwv-larimercounty.org. For more information on issues and candidates, you can go online to vote411.org, and you can use the blue book. Every registered voter should have gotten this book and in the mail from the state, so you can look at this and read all the amendments and the issues, not local ones, but statewide ones. And the League of Women Voters is having an old-fashioned political rally on October 11th, starting at 5:30 p.m. at the ranch at I-25 in Loveland. So if you want to meet some candidates and ask them questions, that's where you go. October 11th at 5:30, and that will be at the ranch, which I still call the fairgrounds on I-25 in Loveland. So thank you very much for being here and for watching, and thank you very much.